Good morning, I'm Tyler Bachman and welcome to Fox Valley Headline Makers. I'm really glad to be joined here today for a special episode of our show. We're around the winter time now. We're going to be talking with a couple of individuals here. One about some winter preparation in terms of what directors do when snow and ice comes in the wintertime. We're also going to be talking about some topics regarding Montgomery recently, water conservation, and other topics. I'm really happy to want to welcome in my guest here this morning, Montgomery Public Works Director Todd Hoppenstedt.
Thank you,
Todd,
Tyler.
thanks for joining us. And then Pete Waller's engineering consultant for the village.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well, I wanted to start off first with a little bit of introductions for our guests here today to talk a bit about how you guys came to your positions right now. And I guess, Todd, I'll start with you. How long have you been with the village, and what got you into working in public works?
My background's a little bit lengthy. I've worked for 4 different municipalities now in my career, but I've been with Montgomery for now 2.5 years, since July of 2015. Really enjoy the community.
Yeah, great. And what got you into wanting to work in the public works field, I guess, to start with?
You know, it's something that I've kind of always had an interest in since I was a little kid. I remember my mom telling me about my interest with backhoes and street sweepers before I even really knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it's just something that's kind of stuck with me, and it's turned out to be a great career.
Right, right. And Todd, I just wanted to add too, maybe for those of our listeners and viewers that don't necessarily know what a public works department does for your village or city, maybe give a quick brief overview of what that entails. It's a lot of things, obviously.
Yes, often I find myself explaining that to people, and pretty much anything that's not police and fire falls on public works a lot of times.
Yep.
There are certainly other departments that help, run the village, but all the operational things from water treatment and distribution, sanitary sewer collection, storm sewer conveyance, streets, street lights, street signs, sidewalks, trees, special events, all that fun stuff.
Right, right. Pete, let me bring you in here as well. You're the consultant with the village, the engineering consultant, and I know you do a lot outside of the village as well, but I guess what got you into wanting to be an engineer in the first place too, and I guess working in that field?
So I think with like a lot of engineers, we start out as problem solvers. That's kind of what motivates us to go into engineering. And I really enjoyed working for municipalities. So our firm is designated, that's one of our specialties, is municipal engineering. So we do all aspects of municipal engineering, from roads to water treatment to wastewater treatment. You name it, we'll be able to handle it. We also really enjoy working directly for villages like Montgomery, for example. I've been doing their consulting since 1990.
Yeah.
So got a long history with them, which is fun because you can see long-range plans come to fruition, and so that's always a good thing. I think.
What are the other municipalities around here you guys represent?
City of Yorkville. We work in Hampshire, Hinckley, Burlington, Newark. I'm going to miss a few. So Sugar Grove,
Sure.
Where our office is at.
Yep.
And there's a lot of other communities that we work in. For instance, Elgin, Algonquin, Aurora, Schaumburg, where we do specific projects from time to time of a variety of nature. So we're doing work in all of the metro area of Chicago.
Certainly. Well, Todd, let me throw it to you here first. I think we just actually had this week, some significant snowfall that came down, and I'm sure winter is quite a busy time for you and several other public works directors around this part of the state. But I wanted to talk with you about a couple things, including some of the preparations, the work that goes into to de-icing and to putting salt down on the roads and prepping for winter when it comes up. So I guess I'll throw it to you first here and tell us some of the work that you guys do leading up to this part of the year to get ready for that.
Sure. Well, Tyler, there's a lot of planning obviously goes into snow and ice management. We're planning essentially the entire year. One of the things that I'd like to educate people on is that our efforts for snow and ice in the modern era they begin well before the snow begins to fly.
Yeah.
Years ago, decades ago, it was more a reactive operation. Now it's more of a proactive operation. There's technologies called anti-icing, which is the pre-treatment of roadways with a salt brine, which is just water and rock salt blended together and applied to the road. There's some other chemicals that we can use to create what I call cocktails. Sugar beet juice is often mixed in there. Calcium chloride at times will be mixed in there.
Yeah.
And there's numerous different types of winter storms. There are now more tools in our arsenal to try and fight those winter storms, both before the snow begins to fly and then during. And one of the things that really helps us do is to reduce our dependency on chlorides. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I wanted to talk about Montgomery's success with anti-icing.
Yeah.
So we began this program about 2 years ago when I came on as the Public Works Director. And through some partnering collaboration with the Village of Oswego, we've really become successful quickly, the two villages together. So Oswego has, they're fortunate to have a very sophisticated brine making mechanism.
Yeah.
They make their own brine in their shop, their forces do. They're able to combine different liquids and mix and blend things, and then they pump it into a truck that we own. So some residents, both in Montgomery and Oswego, may see a Montgomery truck
Sure.
working in both communities.
So it's a shared services.
That's
deal.
exactly right. So I have received that inquiry before, is your driver lost? No, it's all part of the plan.
Yeah.
They're doing, Oswego is doing work kind of behind the scenes within their garage that's helping benefit Montgomery residents.
Yeah.
Our work is a little bit more visible to the Oswego residents as our truck is labeled as such and it's rolling down the streets. So it's a great collaboration. I think about it as, you may be familiar with the agricultural world.
Yep.
For many years, farmers have only had, maybe one or two pieces of specific equipment. The cost is just too high for every farmer to own everything.
Sure.
So they kind of group up and collaborate, and you may use your combine on my field, and I may use, and I'm not even familiar with all the pieces of equipment,
Right.
but you understand where I'm going with
Yep.
this. So to reduce the capital expense and the fleets that each municipality has to possess and keep in their arsenal to be prepared for these events, we can certainly reduce our expenses by collaboration.
I was just going to say, I'm sure that's really helped both municipalities to reduce their costs during this time of the year. And I wanted to ask as well, what exactly does the prep look like compared to maybe this week when we had, I don't know, maybe an inch or so of snow, a little more, to when we have a huge snowfall that comes out? I'm sure that the around the clock work when that happens is quite immense.
Right. So the anti-icing work that happens before the storm really wouldn't take us any more time, regardless of the event. The cocktail, if you will, of chemicals that's applied to the roadway may vary slightly, but the amount of time spent applying it and making it really wouldn't vary significantly.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are differences in storms, and the operational needs during those can vary drastically.
Sure.
So, one thing that many people might think is not of great concern is rain this time of year. Unfortunately, with the air temperature and the pavement temperature where they're at, that could mean freezing rain.
Yeah.
So we actually may spend more resources, both salt, chlorides, and manpower on a freezing rain event this time of year than we would on, say, a 6-inch snowfall. We're very familiar with how to deal with snow. It's ice that can be very tricky, especially when you're operating a big truck in heavy traffic. Safety is of the utmost importance.
And I have to ask, did you say before that part of that cocktail that's put together involves beet juice that goes in it?
Correct. So there are numerous different vendors that will supply this to public agencies. But essentially it's sugar beets, and it's a derivative product. So it's a liquid format. It looks a lot like molasses. It's very thick, tacky. It has a little bit of an odor to it, but it's not bad. So if you, not only in Montgomery, but wherever you live, if you see in advance of a forecasted storm, kind of these white or brownish lines along the roadway. You may even observe the truck spraying it. It's not leaking, he's not spilling anything. It's all intended, and yes, it's the pre-treatment.
Understood. And I think you told me before that some of this has to do with you're trying to reduce your chlorine dependency that's within this. Is that right?
So chlorides, essentially. Sodium chloride is rock salt, as people would know it, the stuff that we've thrown on the roads for years. Calcium chloride, also a chloride, is a bit more harsh, but it's very effective at fighting ice and snow at very low temperatures. Those chlorides, especially like sodium chloride, it never dissipates. It never goes away. It may go into solution, it may dissolve, but it washes into the storm sewers and then ultimately into our naturalized basins, into our creeks, our rivers. Recent data has even shown that it's starting to make its way down into the aquifers where we pump our drinking water from.
Yeah.
When you're treating drinking water, the removal of chlorides is very difficult and very expensive if you're even successful at doing so. So reducing that chloride dependency through snow and ice operations is obviously a benefit to nature, to the ecosystems and the naturalized areas, but also to the aquifers. It's unfortunately going to take a little bit of a change in expectations for people in our region. We live in a region, or in a nation anyhow, where people kind of expect immediate gratification.
Yeah, right.
Your
They gotta get to work in the
smartphone or
morning
whatever
and-
it is, you want things immediately. Well, that's exactly right. They want to leave their cul-de-sac as if they're getting on I-88.
Right.
The two roads should never be treated the same as far as operations go, and the equipment designated for those areas and the chemicals used should not be the same as well. So it's kind of an adjustment for mindset. It's going to take some time, but it's something that we're working on.
Yeah. Pete, let me throw it back to you here. I want to chat with you on our next topic, which is water conservation, where the village is kind of at long-term plans for your water. There was, I know, some discussion with the village board earlier this year, and kind of wanted to see what you guys have been looking into about that for years to come.
Sure. So I think the modern water planning really was re-energized in 2006 when the governor then commissioned a Water 2050 plan for the Chicago metro region, which looked at water supply to the year 2050. And during that process, several things were identified, but one of the things that was significant was that the deep aquifer, which many communities in the western suburbs rely upon, especially out in the Fox Valley region, was being mined so that the water levels were continually going down. So there's several ways to combat that, one of which is to identify alternate water supplies, which they're out there, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But the other way to extend the life of an aquifer is to reduce the amount of water you take out of it. And so if you can reduce the per capita consumption by individuals, then obviously that resource will last longer. And so that was really what I think jump-started the discussion on water conservation. And when Water 2050 was concluded in 2010, a new organization was formed called the Northwest Water Planning Alliance, primarily at the direction, or I guess the idea of Mayor Wisner, who was then mayor of Aurora. And that group was formed with 5 councils of government and 5 county board chairs, represents about 80 different communities or governments, and about 1.3 million people. Now that group has taken up the challenge of reducing and helping to give some intelligent water planning advice to communities. One thing is to start to reduce the amount of water we use per capita. So one very easy thing that was done was a outdoor water conservation ordinance, which really just tried to manage when people use water. So it's as simple as on an odd day, the odd addresses water, on an even day, the even addresses water, and then they limit the time that we do the watering so that we don't have a lot of evaporation. So you have an early morning watering period and a late night watering period. And just by doing that, you'll reduce your peak demands, and not only do you protect the aquifer and extend it, but what you also do is reduce the size of facilities that you need in the future. So you don't need as large of pumps, you don't need as large as elevated tanks. So all of those things relate to capital savings for the resident, and that in the long term is a way you can really save some money. There's a short-term issue because all communities bill their water systems by unit. So if people use less units, you have less revenue coming in. So you have to make adjustments as needed to make sure that you have enough revenue to run your system. And that really is an education process so that folks understand that, yes, I'm using less water, I may be paying the same amount that I did before, but the real benefit is down the line when you have to build smaller facilities to add new population or to serve the old population.
Yeah. Now, hasn't there been some long-term discussion with other municipalities about work in the Fox River for the water supply in Montgomery?
So, Village of Montgomery, City of Yorkville, and Village of Oswego banded together to do a joint study to determine whether or not it was feasible to use the Fox River as a source of alternate supply.
Yeah.
As you, I'm sure, know, Elgin and Aurora already do that. So it's technically feasible. The question is it economically feasible?
Yeah.
So that analysis was run. We also engaged the Illinois State Water Survey into the process to determine whether or not there was enough sufficient volume in the river to allow us to have enough water to withdraw. That analysis was done. There is sufficient water. So it is a viable alternative supply that's currently now being evaluated further to determine what's going to be the best course of action. But I think it's certainly a viable option for those communities. And while we're mining the deep aquifer, it's not an emergency today, but we do think it's time to plan and move forward. And to the credit of those three communities, that's what they're doing.
Sure.
So they're looking ahead to the future, which in water supply, you have to look 20, 30, 40 years in the future. It's not on 4-year cycles. So, and again, I have to commend those three communities because they're very forward thinking and they understand the value of having a reliable water supply. It's an economic driver for our region. The fact that we have such sustainable water is a great thing, and I certainly want to keep it moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come right back here on Fox Valley Headline Makers.
The color in my garden keeps the pink in my cheeks. I was very independent and thought I could take care of myself. I fell and I had to have Meals on Wheels. They're my savior. My name is Lola Silvestri. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at America Let's Do Lunch.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
They call me Prince like I'm royalty or something. But the places I've lived ain't no palaces. So I don't need grilled salmon or a new scratching post. Just give me a cardboard box and a can of tuna and we're good. You can even change my name. I'm cool being the kitty formerly known as Prince.
They're coming. Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to Fox Valley Headline Makers. Tyler Bachman back with you here again today, and want to bring back my guests, Todd Hoppenstedt, Public Works Director here in Montgomery, and then Pete Wallers, the Village's Engineering Consultant. So guys, thanks again for joining me today. Do appreciate having you here, and we were talking a bit about water conservation here before and some of the long-term plans in the village, and I know we were talking about some work that the alliance that you guys mentioned was working on right now. Let's chat more about that.
Yeah, so as Pete was mentioning, the Northwest Water Planning Alliance is a group that represents over 80 councils of government, or agencies anyhow. And one of the recent efforts is to try and involve people across many different backgrounds in a sensible salting committee. I had talked a little bit earlier about the necessity to reduce chlorides. Sensible salting is just that. We want to look at ways where through education we might be able to encourage not only the public snowplow operators and salt applicators, but the private industry as well for your shopping plazas and things. Through education, we hope that we can get people to agree on doing what's best for the environment and reducing that chloride dependency. Again, if we're going to try and shift the overall expectation of the motoring public in this region, it only makes sense to do it across boundaries.
Right.
So,
So I want to add a little bit to that. So the Northwest Water Planning Alliance is a totally voluntary organization. It's a little unique in that we have a technical advisory committee, which Todd is a member and I'm a member, and we have other partners like the Illinois State Water Survey and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources that are part of our technical advisory committee. But the organization is run by an executive committee, which is all elected officials. So Mayor Captain from Elgin is the current chairman of the organization. But locally here, Mayor Galinsky and Mayor Johnson, Mayor Galinsky from Yorkville and Mayor Johnson from Oswego, are members of the executive committee. And they're important because they give direction to the TAC as to what we should be doing out there. And one of the things that has been identified by State Water Survey is the increasing levels of chloride in our groundwater.
Sure.
And it's been going up as much as 4 milligrams per liter per year. It varies throughout the area, but it's been continually going up. And that's a result, as Todd said, of the chlorides we use for snow removal and ice control, both on the public and the private sector side. And one of the areas that we were concentrating on at the direction of our executive committee is to work on the private sector, because if you think about the larger parking lots like hospitals and major shopping centers, there's just a tremendous amount of pavement that's getting salt applied to it, and we think that can be done more efficiently. So we're not going to eliminate chloride use, but we'd like to make it as efficient as possible, both on the public sector side and the private sector side. So our subcommittee, the Sensible Salting Committee, is going to be developing best management practices that can be used by both groups to try to refine the use of chloride. And we think that that, again, will protect things into the future. There's a lot of communities that rely on shallow groundwater for their main supply. For example, Plano does that. So it's important for all the communities to understand that. And one of the components to that is to get education to the public to understand that maybe their expectations of pavement management needs to be dialed back a notch so that we can not use as much chlorides as we absolutely have to.
So it's environment, saving your environment versus how much salt, how much you're putting down essentially.
Not to mention the capital costs or the operational costs of purchasing that salt. Salt prices vary from year to year depending on the demand, obviously. This year they're at somewhat of a low, but a few years back when we had the winter vortex, or the polar vortex, I should say, some people were paying $200 a ton. So if we can reduce what we need, we're helping the bottom line as well.
Absolutely. Want to make sure we're able to get to this. I wanted to chat with you guys as well a bit about some of the discussions regarding overflow in the community in Montgomery. And the word that you mentioned, I'm trying to remember what it was. Compensatory storage, is that what you said it was? Compensatory storage, yes.
Right.
Wanted to chat about it because we've had some discussions at the village board about flooding in a couple different neighborhoods around the area. And so one of the things that you guys did was you looked into a bit of a study about maybe what could be done if the village board were to decide in the long term to put additional things in, right?
So we have 3 floodplain areas in the village. On the west, it's the Blackberry Creek overflow, which we'll come back to. We have flooding along the Fox River, and then we have some flooding along Waubonsie Creek. So the area along the Montgomery overflow is part of a TIF now. So in order to permit development, there has to be a study of the floodplain to see how we can possibly get industrial, commercial properties to locate there. Well, we certainly look for opportunities to have coincidental benefit to other residential properties as part of that. So the study is looking at, can we move floodplain around to make it more efficient and to provide for industrial growth to give us a tax base, but also get some relief for flooding for the local residents. So that's what's underway. That'll be discussed probably in February. We're still working through a lot of that, but the idea is, again, to make things better through use of the TIF funds and to attract more businesses into the city as well.
And the areas, I remember that some of the residents had talked about, it's the Lakewood Creek West area and then Lindenwood, is that right?
Yeah, so now we're in some other different areas. The Lindenwood Johnson subdivision is unincorporated.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a nearby development that's Aurora University's
Yeah.
athletics center. So the Johnson Lindenwood properties are mapped in the floodplain now. And the question was, what impact has Aurora University done? So one of the things we did at a board meeting is we just went through and confirmed that the AU folks had provided the detention that's required by ordinance and provided the compensatory storage that they needed, because they did fill in a little bit of floodplain, but then they excavated 1.5 times that amount in another location. So that's been confirmed. We're waiting on some detailed grading analysis, but the design was appropriate and proper. So really the AU facility had no impact on those properties, but they still remain in the floodplain, and it's an ongoing issue. Now what we hope to do as part of phase 2 is to try to see if there's ways that we can improve the situation in that area, and we'll certainly do that. As far as the Lakewood Creek West area, that's an area what we would characterize as a drainage issue. It's not flooding, but there's room for improvement there, and the village board has been very adamant that they want that issue resolved. So we're currently working on that. There's some work that the Illinois Department of Transportation did as part of their phase 1 study for Route 30 that we hope to piggyback on, so that we try to maximize our investment for additional storm sewer in that area and take advantage of what the state's going to do in the future. So that's underway as well. The state hasn't finished their study yet, and we're waiting for that result before we can complete our work.
And I thought I remembered you saying at one of the meetings, talking about the building standards versus what data you guys have in front of you right now. For example, was there a state survey that's being revised or being looked at?
So what's happening is rainfall data is being reevaluated, and will probably be, my suspicion is it'll be increased. So right now, for Kane County, the 100-year storm is set at like 7.6 inches of rainfall. In the late 70s, early 80s, when I started, the rainfall was about 6.2 inches for 100-year rain. So over time, it's been reevaluated. There's been statistical analysis that are completed by, again, the State Water Survey, and then they issue a bulletin that says, okay, now these are the 100-year levels that you should use. So in the future, there'll likely be different design standards. We're currently working on a revision to the King County Stormwater Ordinance, and I suspect that if those revisions happen, those will be adopted in the revisions to the ordinance before it's published. So, and that likely won't come out for another year. So
Sure. I do think we have a quick second we can chat about it. I know a story that I had done from the village board meeting was about the IDPH standards. We've talked a bit about the chlorine residual, and something that's kind of coming down from the state level right now. Montgomery has joined in, kind of forming against that at this point. Is that right?
Well, so the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency has requested from the Illinois Pollution Control Board a change in the chlorine standard and the chlorine residual standard. So right now the standard is 0.2 milligrams per liter for free chlorine. They're requesting that it be raised to 0.5 milligrams per liter of free chlorine. The village has taken the position that while we understand that more chlorine has some benefit, we think that there's more negatives to that increase than there are benefit. And where we're getting that cue from is the Illinois State and American Water Works Association, which represents, I would say, almost all of the operators in Illinois, has unilaterally come forward and said that standard, we don't need to change that standard. And it's rare that you get that many people agreeing on something. So, and that group has then also petitioned the Illinois Pollution Control Board and said, look, we don't think that standard needs to be changed. We understand there's some issues with the plumbing code that relate to it, but we don't think this is the right way to attack it. So the village took that position. I think it's a sound position. We oftentimes have complaints from residents of too high chlorine, and if we have to go to yet a higher residual standard, we're certainly going to have that. The village has state-of-the-art equipment. They analyze chlorine at each of their supply centers, and so they control it very well. and we maintain a residual throughout the system that's very consistent now, and we don't think there's a need to increase it. So I would say at this point, yes, we're opposed to it, or we're voicing our concern to the Illinois Pollution Control Board, and we'll just see where that comes out.
Sure. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me here today, Todd Hoppenstedt and Pete Wallers. Have a great day.
Thank you.